My wife used to have brown eyes, but now they're blue. Mayor. Jesus, just her name sends shivers down my spine. It's so difficult to find ways to describe this woman in a way that articulates who she is. I mean, essentially, she's perfect in every single way. She is my partner in crime, the light of my life, and all the other completely cheesy things I could call her. Mayor is, completely, totally, in every sense, my everything. I mean, being married is very serious commitment, wouldn't you say? I've always told her till death do us part and then some. And I've meant that, always have, always will. So in that context, when her accident happened, I thought that this would be nothing for us. We'd survived 11 years of the married life, and by then a little accident wasn't going to stop Mare and I, of course. She had to stay at the hospital for a little while, and there was about a week when I couldn't see her, but eventually I brought her home. The plan I had in my head was to try and get everything back to normal. We were going to follow a routine to get me and Maya back on track. I just wanted to move forward and forget everything about the accident. But alas, that was not what fate had in store. You see, a little after 2 days, I had a slight twinge, a gut feeling that something was off. At first I couldn't put my finger on it, but once I figured it out, it hit me like a train. Maya, my Maya, had brown eyes. But suddenly her dark eyes had turned an icy, cold blue. I wanted to think it was fake, a joke. So, I approached her with my discovery. Maya? I asked softly. Yes, Cameron. She didn't look at me, which struck me as odd but not unusual. I made a mental note. Are you wearing contacts? What? My wife stammered. Your eyes are brown, Maya. Not blue. Cameron, I think you need to lay down. She chuckled nervously. My eyes have always been blue, no. I thought sternly, no they have not. But what else could I do? Arguing would do nothing good. I mean, okay love. If you're sure. I responded and left it at that. Ever since that day I started noticing other things. Everything. The different tint of brown in her hair. Maya's responses to food that I thought were her favorite. I could swear she's ever so slightly shorter than I once thought she was, and her fingers are a little too thin. And most important to me, her eyes seem to be swollen, along with the entirely wrong fucking color. It's wrong. She's wrong. She's not Maya. There's a couple of other, not so little things though I thought I could share, that would solidify my case. In the morning, if I wake up early enough, I can hear Maya softly sobbing in the kitchen, and when she's alone, or thinks she's alone, she starts scratching the walls. It's either that, or she tries to open things like drawers, cabinets. She's gotten into 3 drawers so far, just to find them empty. She then loses it, screaming and crying. After things like that, we have talks. It's so difficult with things like this. I try to help Maya adjust after our incident. I tried to be patient with everything going on in Maya's life. I tried to get us back on a routine too. But it didn't work. She didn't want it to work. Yes, I could overlook her different colored eyes, her fucking annoying tantrums of scratching and screaming. I could ignore everything. But one night everything reached a crescendo. Listen, I've tried to ignore her tantrums, really I have. Most nights I just put a pillow on my head until she wears herself out, but tonight I just couldn't. Maybe it was Maya trying to muffle her cries, or maybe it was the sound of the padlock smacking into the window. Whatever it was, I couldn't take it. She had pushed my limits. I got up and made no effort to quiet my footsteps as I went to confront her. I heard her gasp as she turned and saw me. Maya. I said tiredly, those aren't coming off until you've learned to readjust to the house. We've talked about this, about our routine. Cameron, please, I just want to leave, she begged. I want to see my mom. Please, I've told you why you can't see her, Maya. Please, 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 please. Maya. Please, Cam. Enough fucking crying, Maya. I bellowed. I lost my temper, snapped, although I shouldn't have. I regretted my actions immediately, but it was too late. She flinched away from me and tried to shrink into the door, shaking. I sighed. I'm sorry, darling. I didn't mean to yell. Forgive me, stress of work. I crouched down and held out my hands, motioning to her. She defiantly shrank away from me and didn't budge. Maya. No. Maya. I said, more sternly this time. That's not my fucking name. The hall echoed with her cry. At the time it took everything in my power to be the best husband I could be. To not lash out and be reasonable. Do you really want to start that? Do you remember what happened last time? And just as quickly as she had started, she stopped. Maya was still, then slowly crawled over to me. I gently wrapped my arms around her. It's gonna be okay, I promise. You'll adjust to this place, to me. In the meantime, let's compromise, okay? You can get freedom around the house when I leave, and in return you agree to stay, Maya. Sound fair? She sniffled and nodded. One more thing, okay? Yes, Cameron. I held onto her a little tighter. Don't ever fucking disobey me again. Or you'll find yourself getting more than a scolding. Silently, my new Maya shook her head. Good, I'm glad we are clear. Now, get back to bed. As I watch her leave, the light patter of her bare feet in the hall, a faint smile can't help but pass over my face. Technically she's not Maya, or at least not the Maya I need her to be. There are flaws, and I'll definitely have to adjust some things. But soon it'll be like my wife was never gone. The Scissor Man. I first heard the story when I was 8. I was having a sleepover at my friend Matt's house, and it was getting pretty late, to which my friend suggested we go to bed. When I asked him to stay up a little longer, he replied with, "We can't. The Scissor Man will find us." Who's the Scissor Man? I asked curiously. He's the ghost of the school groundskeeper who kidnaps and murders children. Matt replied, "Why died?" I raised my eyebrows in palpable fear and a trickle of morbid fascination. I wanted to know more about this. The story has apparently been circulating around my town for years, and yet for some reason I never heard it before that night. Matt proceeded to tell me the story of the Scissor Man, which goes as follows. Years ago, there was a groundskeeper in our town's elementary school whose name was long forgotten. He was a silent and scary looking man, only speaking when he needed to scold misbehaving children, so all the kids started avoiding him. He would often be seen with garden shears, cutting grass and trimming the hedges around his small home. He lived just off the school grounds in a small house. Kids would often hear the snipping of his shears before seeing him appear, hence the name Scissor Man was given to him. Stories started circulating about how the Scissor Man killed his wife with his shears and escaped to our small town, where he decided to lie low and escape the police. However, more sinister stories started emerging soon about the Scissor Man kidnapping and brutally murdering the school's children with his shears. At first, those were just rumors, scary stories to tell around the campfire, but soon children actually started disappearing. 1, then 2, then 10. In a small town like this one, even one disappearance was a nightmare, and since the police had no solid evidence to pinpoint a suspect, the townsfolk took it upon themselves to bring justice for the missing children. They armed themselves and marched to the Scissor Man's house, none of them having any proof, but clinging on to the urban legends like moths to a flame, desperately looking for some sort of answer about the missing children. Not even giving him a chance to explain himself, the mob invaded the Scissor Man's house and brutally beat him, forcing him to confess what he did to the children. He proclaimed his innocence and begged them not to kill him, but they refused to listen. They saw the shears he so loved, sitting right there on the kitchen table. It's unknown who delivered the final blow, but the story ends with the Scissor Man getting killed by his own shears, his throat snipped open and him bleeding out on his living room floor. Years have gone by since then, and the missing children were never found, but the disappearances stopped. For a while at least. The children who went to school while the Scissor Man worked there grew up and had their own children, and that's when the disappearances started once more. It was around that time that the townsfolk realized what a terrible mistake their parents have made in murdering the wrong person, but it was too late. A new tale emerged that the ghost of the Scissor Man was still around, seeking revenge against the descendants of all those who were responsible for his death. Although the names of townsfolk responsible were well known, most of the people turned a blind eye to it. They were mortally scared for their own children, afraid that the Scissor Man would come for their child next, because of what their parents did. The disappearances happened in unpredictable manners, once a year, once every 2 years, but children would still disappear, despite the precautions the parents and schools took. A lot of the people moved out by the time I was born, and many others who stayed accepted the fact that their child might end up missing one day if the Scissor Man so willed it. Not even 3 months after Matt told me about the story, he went missing. The last time I saw him, we were saying goodbye after school and making plans for our next sleepover on the weekend. I never saw him again. I grew up with the tale of the Scissor Man, fearing every day when returning from school that I would hear the snipping of those garden shears before the Scissor Man snatched me, or worse. And then the disappearances stopped once again, for a few years. The people hoped that it was finally over, however the lack of children going missing was only a reprieve. In time, the story remained even as I grew up as an urban legend. And then the disappearances started once more when I got to my adult age. It's strange how the town got accustomed to it, as if it were a completely normal thing. No one talked about it, since they felt as if even mentioning the scissor man's name would bring about his presence and put one's family in danger. I stayed in town and found a relatively good job, and despite having to do a lot of overtime, I didn't complain. Life went on as normally as it could under such circumstances. And then one evening a few months ago, I was sitting at home and flipping through TV channels when the news popped up. The screen changed to a reporter standing in front of the elementary school with a microphone in his hand. He said, "The police are saying they are a step closer to finding the notorious scissor man." This got my attention. I leaned forward, transfixed on the TV. I spent a portion of my teenage life obsessing over the scissor man, trying to dig up any meager scraps of information available on him. The man on the TV continued, "The serial killer known as the scissor man has been terrorizing our small town for more than 30 years, and despite the efforts of the police, he was never found. However, with the newest evidence emerging, the police say it is only a matter of time before the suspect slips again and brings himself closer to being caught." I found myself gripping the armrest of the sofa with a feverish grip. Could this be it? The reign of the scissor man finally coming to an end? I continued listening to the man on the news. The police suspect that the murderer is inside the town and is considered to be extremely cunning. He could be hiding anywhere, even inside your homes. Make sure to lock your doors and windows whenever you leave your homes, or before going to bed. There was a muffled thump from my basement. I felt my heart beginning to race. I turned down the TV and perked up my ears. It was unnervingly quiet. It felt as if whatever had made that noise was aware of how loud it was and was now trying to be quiet. I slowly stood up, heart thumping in my chest. I approached the basement door and put my ear against it. I couldn't hear anything. No, there was something in there, but I just couldn't tell what. It was too quiet and inconsistent. I mustered the courage I had and turned the key, swinging the door open. I was met with the faces of bound and gagged children. One of the children lay motionless on the floor, his features indiscernible from the dark. Tears streamed down the other children's faces, and at their sight of me, they whimpered even louder. I put my finger over my lips in a SHHH motion and said, "Don't make a sound, or there will be more slipping." I smiled and closed the door, locking them up again. I would need to be more careful not to leave traces for the police to find from now on. I glanced to the right, towards the blood-stained garden shears on the chute stand. The same ones that my grandfather and father used before me.